Wait, you're a Bears fan and you're not subscribed to my channel? Before this video starts, make sure to 1. Hit the subscribe button below to catch all Bears content right here on this podcast. 2. Hit the bell notification because you, my friend, are a diehard Bears fan. And 3. Like this video and tell all the Bears fans you know about the channel. Alright, that's better. Now that you're actually subscribed to the channel, make sure to bear down and enjoy this video.
You're listening to Geek on the Mic. Geek on the Mic. A podcast all about the Chicago Bears. This podcast starts right now. Geek on the Mic.
Hey, what's going on, Bears fans? Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Geek on the Mic, the podcast all about the Chicago Bears. Before we get this episode started, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to catch all Bears content right here on the podcast. Make sure you follow me on my Instagram page at Geek on the Mic. Make sure you share this podcast with all the Bears fans that you know, and you'll also be able to listen to this episode of Geek on the Mic on Apple Podcasts. I'll be here all offseason giving you guys all offseason news, everything on the Chicago Bears. So make sure you really drop the subscription and the bell notification so you really don't miss any content right here on the podcast. So today's video is going to be about the Senior Bowl. Obviously, the Senior Bowl was last week, and today I'm going to list off the 5 standouts from the Senior Bowl that should be on the Chicago Bears radar. When I'm listening through these players, these 5 players, these are not players that I'm saying that the Bears they need to draft these guys. These are just guys that stood out in the Senior Bowl in my eyes, and they should be on the Chicago Bears radar when they are up on the clock in the 2021 NFL Draft. So the first one on the list, and obviously I can't say I've been a huge fan of this guy going into the draft process, but number 1 is Mac Jones, quarterback from Alabama. He was easily the best quarterback at the Senior Bowl, and the funny thing about that is that he didn't even play in the Senior Bowl game. He looked solid, consistent all week at practice, where the decision-making looked pretty good. And to me, I think the only thing on Mac Jones that I'm kind of hesitant about, I'm thinking if you don't get the offensive line figured out, then I'm not sure if I want Mac Jones as my quarterback. But he can easily be there at pick number 20 for the Chicago Bears. And I feel like if he is there and he's the best player available at 20, knowing if we actually have a first-round pick, if he's there at number 20, I may be okay with the Bears pulling the trigger for Mac Jones with their first-round pick. Number 2, this is a guy that I've liked even before the draft process in the Senior Bowl. Michael Carter, running back from North Carolina, has been getting a lot of buzz around the NFL. And to me, it wouldn't hurt to bring in help for David Montgomery and Tariq Cohen, because we all know that Tariq Cohen's a Swiss Army knife. He's special teamer. He can be a slot receiver. So I think if you brought in a guy like Michael Carter to complement his game with David Montgomery, I think that would be something very special in that backfield for the Chicago Bears offense. He once again, he also had a strong week. He showed his ability to break through tackles and showcasing his power and elusiveness. And it kind of reminds me, when you're watching him, it kind of reminds me of how David Montgomery runs. David Montgomery runs with power, but he's also very elusive. So Michael Carter is definitely a guy that I would keep my eye on. I don't want to sit here and say I would take him with my first pick, but if he's there in 2nd or 3rd round, I may have to take him because at that moment, he may be the best player available in the draft. At number 3, I got Quinn Whitehair, offensive lineman, Wisconsin Whitehair. So this is one of those guys that came as a surprise. He came out of nowhere, and you always have those guys every year at the Senior Bowl that just come out of nowhere and blow up the Senior Bowl. So obviously everyone knows that the Bears' biggest need is offensive linemen, and I don't expect the Chicago Bears to ignore the offensive line like they did last offseason. I would hope not. And we also have questions at tackle, and we also need some depth at the interior offensive line. So the evaluation of the offensive line this draft is critical. We know we can't skip it, so Ryan Pace has to be solid when evaluating these offensive linemen. So he showcased his power, showcased his strength, and as well as his toughness. He played through a broken hand and a bone in his hand, so I thought that was pretty impressive. And I think I told you guys this before on a past podcast that I want some offensive linemen with some grit, some guys that are going to show toughness, because the city of Chicago and those fans are tough. Like they're no punk. So we need to draft some players and offensive linemen especially that has some toughness, has some swagger, has some grit. And this guy can definitely fit the bill as an interior offensive lineman. So like I said, I'm not saying that they should draft this guy, but if he's there, you may have to take a chance on this offensive lineman. Number 4, I have Richie Grant, a safety from UCF. Bears could be looking at bringing in their third safety in as many years, ever since we let Amos walk. The Bears have just been, shuffling. So it started off with Clinton Dix and then to Sean Gibson. So there's been a lot of shuffling at that safety position. So the Bears could just re-sign Tayshaun Gibson or look for a younger, cheaper option. And this guy, Richie Grant, can definitely fit the bill if you want that younger and cheaper option. Some notes I had on him is he shined in one-on-one drills and was also always around the ball. So he has that ball hawk mentality. You add this young Richie Grant, and he's learning from obviously one of the best in Eddie Jackson, that in his own right, he's a ball hawk. I think that would be a recipe for success for our safety room. I like Gibson. I think Gibson had a pretty strong year. But it definitely is a huge need for Chicago. Like, they need to figure out the safety position and stick with this safety so Eddie Jackson and that safety can build some chemistry. You don't always want to just have this player for 1 year and then they just leave. So we're trying to build some chemistry in that safety room. So the Bears definitely need to figure that out this offseason. So at number 5, I have Dwayne Eskridge, which is a wide receiver from Western Michigan. With A-Rob's future in doubt, wide receiver quietly is one of the Chicago Bears' biggest needs. So you look, besides Mooney, there's questions about Miller, Wims, and Ridley. And I've been a big advocate for Riley Ridley. I feel like Ridley, it's time for him to give them his opportunity. I feel like Ridley could be a pretty good receiver for the Chicago Bears, like maybe like a number 3 or number 4 guy on the depth chart. But still, they need to give him his opportunity. How do you know what we have when you don't really let him play a lot? And when you do play him, you don't really throw his way. So it's time for Ridley to get his opportunity. But when you're looking at Anthony Miller and Wims, those could be 2 guys that they may just move on from, especially after what Miller pulled against the Saints, throwing a punch. We don't need guys like that. So everyone knows that receiver is a big need for the Chicago Bears, especially if Allen Robinson walks. So you also, I could see the Bears bringing in several new wide receivers. And for this player exactly, he was a surprise standout, just like the offensive lineman I just talked about a couple minutes ago. He showcased a lot of speed, really good route running, and he definitely helped his draft stock. Here's one thing that they were saying about him after the Senior Bowl is some believe that he could be a first-round pick. I don't think the Bears want to go receiver in the first round. I think they want to go offensive lineman or quarterback. I've been hearing some rumors as well that in the latest mock draft that the Bears were awarded Devontae Smith. I'm telling you right now, if Devontae Smith drops to number 20 somehow, I think you go and take the best player available. But at the moment, I think the Chicago Bears need to focus on offensive lineman and then quarterback. So let me know below in the comment section what you think of my 5 players that stood out to me in last week's Senior Bowl. And let me know below if you saw any players that stood out that you think the Bears should be targeting in the 2021 NFL Draft. But before we end this episode, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the bell notification to catch all Bears content right here on the podcast. Make sure you follow me on my Instagram page at KeekOnTheMic. Make sure you share this podcast with all the Bears fans that you know, and you'll also be able to listen to this episode of Keek on the Mic on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you rate and review this podcast. That'll be much appreciated. But other than that, I'll catch you for an all-new Bears video right next time on Keek on the Mic. Thanks, guys.
Now this is a podcast all about Bears. You either cheering for this team or just pulling your hair. I like to take a minute, just sit right back and tell you how I became the number 1 Bears fan. That boy is Benny Hunter. Keek on the mic, Keek on the mic, Keek on the mic, Keek on the mic. people, this the intro. Sacramento, California, born and raised. And Antelope is where I spend most of my days. Talk bad about my team, you must be a clown. This is Keek on the mic, so you know you better bear down.